Well, none of us have any.
None of you have roller, but did you have roller skates in 1977?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, you roller skate. Anybody go to
I
Studio
skated those.
54 in
I
1977?
never
Before
went to
19
studio.
In 1977, did you
I
go
was
to
probably
Studio
married.
54? You were married. Well, I graduated college in 1977. I was 21 when I got out of college.
So, separated right away.
Yeah, so anyway, well, thank you for being here this morning.
When were you born?
I was born in 1956. 56
Oh, my daughter.
plus 21,
So you were
77.
just 65 this year.
We're the same age. We're both on Medicare.
Yeah.
We're both on Medicare. So
that's
actually,
good.
everybody in this
And
room is
we're
on
paying.
Medicare. What? So,
And we're happy to.
oh yeah. So everybody, in fact, Medicare was passed in 1965, which is one of the big parts of my 1965 talk. But anyway, 12 years later, this guy becomes president, Jimmy Carter. Peace in the Middle East, that is big, along with Sadat. Technology. This is the next series of Apple computers back in those days. The Alaska Pipeline, bringing oil down from the North Pole area. ERA stumbles, Equal Rights Amendment, and here is Betty Friedan right here, right in the middle of that march. Skokie, Illinois, there was a Nazi march, or planned Nazi march in Skokie, which is a heavily Jewish area. Gandhi is ousted in India. Adolfo Suarez becomes the Prime Minister of Spain, and the fascist government is gone there. Elvis, what happened?
Dies.
Elvis is literally on the throne in his bathroom where he dies back on August 16th, 1977. You know who also died on August 16th? Babe Ruth in 1948.
Is that so?
Yeah, there he is. Singer suffers heart attack. He was 62 years old. Star Wars, nothing but Star Wars. How many of you saw Star Wars, the movie? Still around. Saturday Night Fever, the movie. Did you go see that with John Travolta back in the day?
Yeah.
Oh, I
yeah.
saw that.
Did you like it?
It was beautiful.
Did you know any of those characters in real life?
No, I don't.
My
no.
best friends.
No, but
They
I
were your
loved,
best
I
friends?
loved his dancing.
They were your best friends who went out dancing?
Absolutely.
His dancing was wonderful.
So did you go out with them dancing
Sure.
back then? See, I wasn't a disco person. I was one of these persons who would go in the corner of the room and talk to you. A lot of women just kind of got up and left after the conversation to go back on the dance floor. So,
Oh no.
yeah, but that was me back then. And Son of Sam was around, and he was arrested back in 1977. And Arnold Schwarzenegger becomes more prominent in 1977.
Oh, I can't
So
stand
Jimmy Carter takes the oath of office on January 20th, 1977. That ends the Nixon era officially, as Gerald Ford is not re-elected, and Ford was never elected president or vice president. And when he announced his candidacy in 1974, he called for a return to honesty and elimination of secrecy in government. He told voters, "I'll never tell a lie." So George Washington, right?
Right.
After he chopped down the cherry tree.
Right.
Well, I don't know where that cherry tree was, though. He defeats Ford, Gerald Ford became president back in August of 1974 after I had to resign. Richard Nixon, I knew Nixon. I dealt with Nixon from 85 to 89. And he said that he was going to restore a sense of morality to both domestic and foreign policy following the 20 years of Vietnam that the Americans were involved there, and also Watergate. And there's Jimmy Carter, not wearing a sweater. He has problems. He has a lot of problems in 1977 that he's got to overcome. Stagflation. The economy experienced a combination of high inflation and slow economic growth. Unemployment, and I'm looking for a job, right? I'm graduating college in 1977, and the unemployment is 7.4%. Fortunately, I was going into radio where they don't pay you any money. So I had all the jobs I wanted to for nothing. He asked James Schlesinger to develop a plan to address the energy crisis. Gas lines, I remember the gas lines after the Arab-Israel War, Yom Kippur War, back in 1973. So there were gas lines again. And he also proposes universal health care. And he wants to establish a national health insurance type thing. So there's also the Cold War, there's also the Middle East, and there's also China. I'm just moving this just a drop, so because I'm going to see this and see what I did right and wrong. Anyway, so he's got the Cold War, which has been going on since 1946. He's got the problems in the Middle East, which have gone on since the start of Israel. And you got China, which turned communist in 1949. One of the first things he did got a lot of people upset at him. Carter pardoned draft dodgers. People like me. Now, I never was faced with the possibility of being inducted into the Army because the draft was done by 1974. I do have, my wife's cousin told me that she felt that she was going to lose her oldest son one of two ways, either in Vietnam or he was going to flee to Canada. There were about 100,000 Americans who fled to Canada because they did not believe in fighting in the Vietnam War. And Jimmy Carter decides to give them a blanket pardon. The blanket pardon, of course, gives them the right to come home. And 90% of the people who fled the country ended up in Canada. They were eventually welcomed back as immigrants, even though we were born in this country.
They were considered
Immigrants. Stagflation,
Wow.
high food prices eat up our wages while we eat less. And people are complaining about all of that going on, that the money is dropping in value. Carter called it the nation's most pressing domestic problem. President Nixon creates the problem by ending the gold standard in 1971.
Right.
The dollar's value plummets from 1971 to 77. Imports rise, and that creates inflation. Nixon tried to stop it with wage control in 1971, but businesses complained, saying that we can't grow, and they laid off people, increased unemployment. But Carter has no solution in 1977. But they do come up, or he comes up with one thing. He's going to raise the minimum wage effective January 1st, 1981, from $2.30 an hour to $3.35 an hour. Now people are talking about $15 an hour minimum wage. This is only 40 years ago, $3.25 an hour. Now the sweater becomes a big, big problem because Jimmy Carter is telling you you have to sacrifice. You have to sacrifice. We have to save energy. And we could do so by wearing a sweater. And I was going to college at the time. And people at the time were kind of laughing at that, saying, a sweater? What does he mean by a sweater? How could you save energy with a sweater? Well, it's simple. Instead of a room being at 72 degrees, you put it down to 68 or 66. Or if you live in my house with my wife, 61. On February 2nd, Carter asked consumers to reduce fuel consumption. He said, we must not be selfish or timid if we hope to have a decent world for our children and grandchildren. I wasn't thinking of children and grandchildren in 1977. Of course, I had both in the mid-'80s and now. We simply must balance our demand for energy with our rapidly shrinking resources. By acting now, we can control our future instead of letting the future control us. As you know, there was a gas crisis in 1979.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing was settled. Carter put solar panels in the White House and called for a $1 billion investment in solar power research. 1981, when he took office, Ronald Reagan ripped out the solar panels. Well, trying to get some more oil into the country, the Trans-Alaska pipeline, there was a discovery of oil on Alaska's northern slope in 1968, And hey, let's go after it. It's oil, let's go. The Atlantic Richfield Company, which was ARCO, British Petroleum, BP, and Humble Oil, which is Esso, Exxon Mobil eventually, agreed to build a pipeline that would connect the northern slope to Valdez. Remember, there was that big ship oil spill in Valdez that kind of ruined the bay later on. An ice-free port on Prince William Sound. The final weld on pumping station number 3 was on May 31st. The oil began to flow through the pipeline on June 20th. The pipeline transformed Alaska and made the state rich for about 4 decades. Something's happened since then. They aren't as rich anymore up in Alaska. They got to pay taxes again. Now, the Secretary of State at that point was Cy Vance. Of course, his son is in the news right now as the Manhattan District Attorney, Cy Vance Jr., looking into the business of the Trump Organization. Cy was the Secretary of State back then, and he decides maybe, just maybe, there is a chance, there's an absolute chance that we could get peace in the Middle East, or at least between Egypt and Israel. And so he's hoping to reconvene the Geneva Conference, which started in December of 1973 to seek the end of the Arab-Israeli dispute. Jimmy Carter says on March 16, 1977, Palestine needs a state, two-state solution. Menachem Begin wins, kind of an upset. And now what happens? Well, let's see what happens. May 17th, an Israeli election upset stunned the Carter administration. The moderate Israeli Labor Party lost for the first time in Israel's history. Menachem Begin, the leader of the conservative Likud Party, and the new Israeli Prime Minister appeared to be intractable on the issue of exchanging land for peace. Arab leaders didn't want any peace either. Since the war, the Yom Kippur War in 1973. No. They also play a role in blocking substantial progress in negotiations for a Geneva conference. But there's Sadat. Sadat's got some domestic stuff at home that he's got to take care of. And he begins to think about, well, maybe, just maybe we should talk. You know, it's been a long time. It's been, at this point, 29 years. Maybe we should talk. The Egyptian president, Anwar Sadat, makes a dramatic move. On November 9th, he would be willing, he said, to go to Jerusalem. The move stunned the world. Sadat would attempt to break the deadlock and engage the Israelis in direct negotiations for the Middle East settlement. On November 20th, 1977, Anwar Sadat became the first Arab leader to visit Israel and address the Knesset with a call for peace. And here is Sadat, here is Begin. And this begins the process which would conclude in 1977 with the Camp David Accords.
Right.
The Arab News reported the peace initiative angered many Arabs, who saw it as a betrayal of the Palestinians. Sadat's move would initiate a series of diplomatic efforts that Sadat continued to strike strong opposition from most of the Arab world and the Soviet Union. Remember, it's the Cold War. In the Soviet Union, one of their client states in the Middle East is Egypt. It would be the beginning of a new era between Egypt, Israel, and the United States. That's the Panama Canal in 2008. I speak on cruise ships when there's no COVID. And anybody been to the Panama Canal? It's no big deal. Really, it's no big deal. This is what you see. It's no big deal. I've been to the Panama Canal 3 times, and it's like, all right, did it once, what's the big deal? Anyway, the Panama Canal Treaty, 1977, the United States is about ready to give up the Panama Canal. Carter and the Panamanian chief of government, Omar Torrijos, signed the Pan Am Canal Treaty and Neutrality Treaty on September 7th. American control over the canal would end by the year of 2000. On May 4th, 1904, Panama granted the United States the right to build and operate a canal and control 5 miles of land on either side of the water passage in exchange for annual payments. Somoza, Nicaragua. Oh, the American policy over the years was, these guys may be bad guys, but they're fighting communists. So because they're fighting communists, and they may be bad guys, there are bad guys. Carter refused to continue the past practice of overlooking human rights abuses of allies.
You can't take your mask off, huh?
No.
So I could hear you better.
Well, all right, I'll do this and I'll stay
Very
back.
good.
Okay. Carter refused the past practice of overlooking human rights abuses of allies and was particularly tough on South Korea, Iran, Argentina, South America, Rhodesia, Zimbabwe. He also ended more than 30 years of U.S. political and military support of one of Latin America's most abusive leaders, President Somoza of Nicaragua. Andrei Sakharov. He's telling people that things are bad in the Soviet Union. He's a dissident. Carter soon openly criticized the Soviets for denying Russian Jews their basic civil rights, a violation of human rights protections outlined in the diplomatic agreement called the Helsinki Accords. Carter publicly supported Russian dissidents, including pro-democracy activist leader Andrei Sakharov, who were fighting an ideological war against socialist leaders. Carter sent a letter of support to Sakharov in February. And also, Carter's got the China problem. What are we supposed to do in China? What can we do? They've been an outcast since 1949, but Nixon goes to China in 1972, and he opens up China. But we don't know how to normalize relationships between the two countries without damaging a rapport with the Soviets, because the Chinese and the Soviets are on the outs at this point. So what do we do? And the Korean War, it's not over. Oh yeah, there was a truce signed in 1953, but it never ended. North Korea shot down an American helicopter on July 14th, killing 3 crewmen and capturing another one. Carter said the craft apparently strayed into communist territory through a navigational error. The North Koreans charged that the Chinook chopper had made a deep intrusion into their airspace and was armed. The surviving crew member was released after the incident. Just a reminder, the Korean War has never ended to this day. And then Carter, who promised honesty and openness in his administration, he's got a problem. It's called the Burt Lance problem. Burt Lance was a small-town Georgia banker who became a preeminent advisor and tennis-playing confidant of Jimmy Carter. He took a job with the administration but was forced to resign after 8 months as the director of office and management and budget because accusations that he personally traded in on his ties with the president. Now, he would be cleared of wrongdoing in 1980, but it would hurt Carter because he promised all kind of honesty. Vietnam and Djibouti joined the United Nations on December 20th. Okay, technology. How many of you have one of these?
I don't.
You don't have a smartphone?
No.
We all know.
She says she doesn't.
I have a cell phone.
You have a cell phone? You got one of those old flip cell phones?
I don't know how to work this.
Oh, it's simple. You just put it
Too
on.
much for me.
Too much. So yeah, all you need is phone calls, right? You get your phone calls.
Oh.
There you go. There you go. Well, here's Wozniak and here's Steve Jobs. And this is Apple back in 1977. This is Apple today, but that's Apple in 1977. Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs incorporate Apple Computer. On June 16th, Oracle Corporation is incorporated in Redwood Shores, California as Software Developer Laboratories by Larry Ellison, Bob Miner, and Ed Oates. The technology revolution starts in 1976 and 1977, and all these years later, except for you have a flip phone. Could you live without your smartphones today?
Probably not.
Probably not. What did you do in 1959 though, when
Yeah.
you had a wall on the phone and you had no
You
call
You
waiting?
dialed your number.
You dialed your number,
That's right.
and if nobody on the other end picked up the phone, you hung up. Imagine living like that.
Seemed good.
Seemed good. Radio Shack computer. This is the Radio Shack, what was it, 1880, 1580, microcomputer system, under 600 bucks. Under 600 bucks, it's a bargain. Radio Shack's out of business now. And you couldn't get that computer if you wanted. Well, you probably somewhere. The TRS-80 microcomputer system is a desktop computer, microcomputer sold by Tandy Corporation through their Radio Shack stores. Now, on September 11th, 1977, the Atari 2600 is released. And I spent a lot of time playing video games in the 1980s because I'm babysitting. What else do you have to do when the kid's there but play Space Invaders, right? So I did. I played Space Invaders. And you know what? I probably would still today if I had the time. It was originally known as Atari Video Computer System, released in North America, and it would revolutionize the video game industry. How many of you ever heard of Phyllis Schlafly?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, you heard of her. How many of you are in favor or were in favor of the Equal Rights Amendment?
Oh, sure.
Sure. Okay. Would have been good for women?
Yes.
Okay. Well, it's kind of interesting that this woman, Phyllis Schlafly, actually single-handedly stopped the Equal Rights Amendment. The Equal Rights Amendment is a proposed, and still is, amendment to the United States Constitution designed to guarantee equal legal rights for all American citizens regardless of sex. It seeks to end the legal distinctions between men and women in terms of divorce, property, employment, and other matters. It was sent to the states in 1972 for ratification, and by 1975 it had 34 states. It needed 38 states. But it never happened. It never happened. The initial ERA plan was introduced in Congress in 1923 by Alice Paul, who once tried to starve herself to death because she wanted to get the right to vote back in the 19-teens. She lived long enough to see Congress pass the ERA and send it down to the states. ERA, yes. ERA, yes. ERA, yes. Bella Abzug.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know that I have a link to Bella Abzug?
Wow.
My aunt, Pearl Berkowitz, was her chief of staff.
Hoo-ha.
There you go. So she was her chief of staff, Bella Abzug. And she has a street in Lower Manhattan named after her because she worked with Bella Abzug. The ERA push faltered because of conservative women. And the number one conservative woman who led the way was Phyllis Schlafly. She had been able to create enough doubts that it made state legislators back off. Schlafly was a working mother. She was a lawyer, yet she said women belonged in the home. Now, how could somebody who's a working mother tell others, you don't have to go out, go stay at home, you don't need equal rights? But somehow she did, and part of it is my business, the media business, never going into her face saying, are you a hypocrite or what? They never did to her, which is a problem in journalism, because journalists never go into the face of people and say, hey, wait a minute, you're saying this and yet you're doing something else? Anyway, her argument was that women would give up the right to be supported by their husbands in a divorce and really pressed hard on the draft issue since women would be required to register to draft, or for a draft, which wasn't existing in those days. Women make up a good component of the armed forces of the United States today. 1977, women don't belong in the armed forces. She was an American attorney, a conservative activist, and an author. She opposed feminism, gay rights, abortion, and successfully... Okay, what do we do now?
Yours?
It's a tornado watch.
Oh, tornado watch,
What?
okay.
Oh.
last time I heard a tornado watch was back in May of 2000,
Where is that?
2020.
Here, so
And,
you gotta get it.
You're getting a
Get it
tornado
on
watch, but I don't
all
have a
the
tornado watch on my phone.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
No, what are you apologizing
Where is
for?
Tornado Watch?
Around here,
Here.
obviously. The last time I was interrupted by a tornado watch was in May 2020. And I was doing a Zoom talk down in Florida, Aventura, Florida. And my wife comes running into the room saying, "Is there a tornado watch up?" So I say to the people on, "Hey, if you lose me, you know what happened." Anyway, maybe Phyllis Schlafly from beyond complaining about me. Anyway, so she campaigns against the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment of the Constitution. She was a professional. She was a lawyer who was married, and her son is gay.
And her son's what?
Gay. Gay.
Her son
Her
is
son,
gay.
her son is gay.
Yeah.
He's gay. She was against gay and lesbian rights. Anyway, so it's up to Washington. They did fix the Washington Monument. In 2017, Nevada became the first state in 45 years to pass the Equal Rights Amendment, followed by Illinois in 2018 and Virginia in 2020. The constitutional threshold of 38 states to ratify has been met, but Congress must eliminate the original deadline, which was 1979, to do so, and they haven't done that yet. Renee Richards. How many of you remember Keith Olbermann, who was on MSNBC?
Oh, I remember
Yeah.
him.
Who?
That was
Keith Olbermann.
Yeah, Dr. Renee Richards was his
I
optometrist.
remember. Just go a little
Yeah.
slower so I can.
Anyway, so
Absorb.
Keith, KO's, I've known Keith since 1979. Keith's optometrist was Dr. Richard Raskin, who became Renee Richards. In 1976, the United States Tennis Association barred female transgender tennis player Renee Richards from playing as a woman in the U.S. Open over in Flushing. Well, actually, it was in Forest Hills that year. Richards sued the USTA for the right to play. A year later, the New York Supreme Court ordered the USTA grant Richards the right to play. Renee Richards did get on the court, and Renee was in her 40s at that time, and she is beaten by Virginia Wade, but she makes history on September 2nd, 1977. And then there was Anita Bryant.
Yeah.
Anita Bryant, actress who became an anti-gay activist, and she lost her gig as an orange juice salesperson in Florida. The singer Anita Bryant in 1977 is mad. In 1977, Dade County, Florida, where Miami is, passed an ordinance sponsored by Bryant's former friend, Ruth Shack, that prohibited discrimination on the basis of sex orientation. Bryant led a campaign to repeal the ordinance as the leader of a coalition named Save Our Children. The campaign was based on conservative Christians' beliefs regarding the sinfulness of homosexuality and the perceived threat of homosexuality recruitment of children in child molestation. The campaign marked the beginning of an organized opposition to gay rights that spread throughout the country. Jerry Falwell Sr. went to Miami to help Bryant. He was from Liberty College. And this is what Bryant said. As a mother, I know that homosexuals cannot biologically reproduce children. Therefore, they must recruit our children. And if gays are granted rights, next we'll have to give rights to prostitutes and people who sleep with St. Bernards and to nail biters.
Right.
To nail biters.
Bryant referred to gay people as human garbage. And there are protests, as you imagine. Lots and lots of protests. In June, the gay rights ordinance was repealed by a vote of more than 2-1. The repeal in Miami led to a wave of repeals and anti-gay rights defeats in other states, including the passage of an Oklahoma law banning gay men and lesbians from teaching in public schools. But along the way, Anita Bryant, who had this all figured out, ruined her career. In February of 1977, the Singer Sewing Machine Corporation. Remember Singer Sewing Machines?
Yeah.
They sponsored a lot of stuff on TV. They also had sponsored the Singer Bowl up in the old World's Fairground, which then had other sponsors as well. Anyway, the Singer Sewing Machine Corporation rescinded an offer to sponsor a possible weekly variety show because of the extensive national publicity arising from controversial political activities. Well, Anita Bryant is going around hating gays and lesbians. A bunch of Nazis are trying to march in Skokie, Illinois in March of 1977, and they said they have free speech to terrorize local people. Now, I don't know if you know too much about Skokie, Illinois, but Skokie, Illinois had a pretty large percentage of Holocaust survivors in the Chicago area living in Skokie. And I can tell you, my wife's friend, whose mother was a Holocaust survivor, lived in Skokie. And you can see the signs, Never Again, Treblinka, also Buchenwald and Slash the Nazis. We remember 6 million dead, Never Again, the counter-protest to the Nazis. The Chicago suburb of Skokie, Illinois, the leader of the Nationalist Social Party of America, or the Nazis, Frank Collin, planned to lead a march through a town full of Holocaust survivors. 1 out of every 6 Skokie residents was a Holocaust survivor. 16%. The march never happened because of lawsuits. Jimmy Carter supported the Skokie residents, but also the right of freedom of speech had to go through the court system. Ultimately, the Nazis were allowed to march in Skokie in 1977. Meanwhile, the South, Mobile, Alabama, a Ku Klux Klan march. Hey, Nazis are up in Skokie, got Anita Bryant running around, you got Phyllis Schlafly running around, and you got the Klan still active in Alabama. The KKK held marches, 1 in Plains, Georgia, the home of Jimmy Carter, 1 in Mobile, Alabama, 1 in Tallahassee, Florida. Indira Gandhi resigns in India. The Prime Minister resigned during a March of 1977 after losing her seat in the general election. She was the daughter of India's first Prime Minister, Nehru. She had been involved in India's politics most of her life. She was the Prime Minister since 1966. In 1977, she's arrested in a graft case. She spends a week in prison in 1978, but hey, just because you go to prison doesn't mean you can't become Prime Minister again, right?
Right.
She became Prime Minister again in 1980. Adolfo Suarez. Well, he's from Spain. And finally, there was a replacement for the fascist dictator who died in 1975, Francisco Franco. Spain holds its first democratic elections in 41 years during June, 2 years after the death of Franco in 1975. It was the first election in Spain since 1936, just before the Spanish Civil War began. The voter turnout, 78.8% of the people in the coalition party, UCD, won the most votes with 34.4% of the total, and Suarez would become the prime minister. Johnstown, Pennsylvania. There have been a lot of floods in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. In fact, there's a statue in Johnstown, Pennsylvania of a dog that helped save residents in one of the floods in the 19th century. And this is what Johnstown, Pennsylvania looked like in 1977 after a flood. It was the second greatest flood to hit Johnstown, and it happened on July 20th. It was the third flood to devastate the town in Cambria County, Pennsylvania. The first one was in 1898. That killed 2,000 people. In 1936, another one killed 24 people. 1977, the flood kills 84. 12 inches of rain fell in 10 inches. Now, I look at this place downstairs. I know you got flooded out here during Hurricane Ida, as did a lot of people I knew. 5 dams failed, inundating the area with millions of gallons of water. The flood causes $340 million worth of property damage. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Elvis. How many of you were Elvis fans?
Not me.
You were an Elvis fan? You liked Elvis? What part of Elvis do you like? Do you like the 50s Elvis or the movies Elvis? You like the movie, those cheesy movies?
Yeah, it's real cheesy, but they were entertaining.
Yeah, especially when he sings the IRS song with Bill
Who's that?
Bixby because he owes money to the federal
Who liked
government.
Elvis?
He's not your uncle.
Eva?
The one,
He's not your
I don't
uncle.
know
Who
her
else
name.
liked Elvis?
she's the wife of the
You
first
did,
guy.
the 50s Elvis or the movies Elvis?
Both.
You liked both. Liked him, Hound Dog and That's
Yeah.
All Right, Mama, and all that other. And then he goes into the army and he
I couldn't
disappears.
stand him.
He disappears.
Couldn't
Who else
stand
liked
him.
Elvis?
I couldn't stand him.
You couldn't stand
Oh, I
Elvis?
liked him.
Why didn't you like Elvis?
He was bad.
Bad as a singer or bad as a
No,
guy?
no.
I liked
As
his
a
wife.
person.
As a person. And you like Priscilla.
Yeah.
You like Priscilla. You know, he
She's still
started,
living.
yeah, he started dating her when she was 13.
Yeah.
13 years old. He was 42 and alone. King Elvis, dead. And he managed to get one of the worst pictures you'll ever see of Elvis
Yeah,
for the
that's
cover of The Sun. By the mid-1970s, Elvis Presley was in declining physical and mental health. He divorced Priscilla in 1973, developed a dangerous drug dependency, prescription drugs. Remember, he went to the White House to see Nixon in 1970 because basically he wanted to get a badge. Because he thought if he had a badge, nobody would bother him, a federal badge, when he tried to bring guns and drugs into foreign countries. But he never went to foreign countries because the colonel, his manager, Tom Parker, was an illegal alien. And he felt if he went out of the country, he'll never get back into the country because he was an illegal alien. So he never booked Elvis outside the country. In fact, the only places Elvis played outside of the country were very early in his career, like 1957, where he played in Toronto, right across 90 miles from Buffalo, and Vancouver, which is about 30 miles north of the Washington state border. He was also addicted to junk food. He liked those Hostess Twinkies probably, and gained considerable weight. In the last 2 years of his life, he made erratic stage appearances, lived as a recluse. On the afternoon of August 16, 1977, he was found unconscious in his Graceland mansion. He was sitting on the toilet bowl when they found him. And he rushed to the hospital where he's pronounced dead. He is buried at Graceland. Two other icons died, Groucho Marx and Charlie Chaplin. Groucho was not in trouble like Chaplin was. If you remember, Charlie Chaplin, because of his socialist leanings, literally couldn't come into the United States in the 1950s because of McCarthyism, communism, House on Un-American Activities. And Chaplin swore he was never going to come back to the United States, but he would in the 1970s. There's Charlie and there's Groucho. August 19th, 3 days after the king of rock and roll, thank you very much, Elvis died, Groucho dies of pneumonia at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, and he is the third of the most famous of the five brothers to die, Chico dying and Harpo dying both in the early 1960s. On Christmas Day, the English comedian and silent film actor Charlie Chaplin dies in Switzerland from a stroke at the age of 88. The odd thing about it, when Chaplin was in trouble back in the 1950s with the United States authorities, today Chaplin is revered. He's absolutely revered, and we're talking here, 44 years ago, so he'd be 122 years old. He's still remembered. Think of the people who tried to keep him out of the United States and how they're remembered. Joe McCarthy.
Oh.
Joe McCarthy. How's Joe McCarthy? Joe McCarthy is remembered as an embarrassment.
Yeah.
And, he was censured by the Senate in 1954, and he died of liver disease in 1977 at the age of 42. How many of those people from the House on Un-American Activities Committee have you ever heard of? Chaplin is still relevant, at least in the movie industry. Groucho, of course, was the king of the quick quips and influenced many comedians. Star Wars, nothing but Star Wars. I've never seen Star Wars.
Neither have I.
I've never seen it. But I was in Tanglewood a couple of years ago, and they played Star Wars. It was the first time I saw it. They played Star Wars, and John Williams was leading the orchestra in Tanglewood. And it dawned on me. I said, what kind of movie is this? I don't understand the movie. And my wife says to me, it's not supposed to be understood. You're supposed to be there as a community reaction. And you're all supposed to enjoy it together. I said, well, I haven't seen Star Wars 1 or any of the sequels. But the Star Wars film premieres on March 25th, 1977. It was written and directed by George Lucas. It starred Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, and Harrison Ford, and Alex Guinness in the lead roles. It was a huge, huge, huge success. It broke box office records. The film was nominated for 11 Academy Awards, won 6, including Best Visual Effects and Best Original Score. Saturday Night Fever. Okay, I told you I never went to discos. I went to bars and had conversations. Anybody go to discos? You said you had friends that went to discos back then. Anybody ever go to a disco? Back in the late 70s, you know, where they had the ball spinning there and some guy would be in the middle of the dance floor with some woman and show off all the moves? I never did that. Now, I often wonder, did I miss out on anything?
Of course you did.
I missed out? Well,
I think so. My mother went to some of that.
How old was your mother at the time?
She was not young, but she was youthful.
There's a woman up at Atari and Darien. Her name is Ronnie Gore, and you might know her daughter. Her daughter is Leslie Gore, the late Leslie Gore. And I'm doing a 1975 talk up in Darien. And I had been introduced to Leslie's mother, Ronnie, before I spoke. And we actually had some mutual acquaintances, so it was okay. So I was talking about the disco age. And I said, you ever go to Studio 54? She said, yeah, I did. I danced, wore my short skirts, had a good time. I said, wait a minute, you're 99 now, and this is 47 years ago. So you were 52.
Yeah.
She said, so? I had a good time. So, you know, she's there. She says, yeah, I had the high heels on and the short skirts and everything back then. And, of course, she was treated like royalty because Leslie was Leslie Gore. It's my party. You don't own me. And Judy's turn to cry and all that other stuff. And she had a son who was writing scores for plays and for movies at the time, so she was treated like royalty. But she said, yeah, and I also brought my wife's hot pants with me that day, because I was talking about 75, and also my old Chuka shells. And she says, put them on. I said, why? She said, put them on, and they still fit, believe it or not. And she says, and hang up the hot pants. I said, why? She said, because I used to wear them to Studio 54. So yeah, see? There were women who went to Studio 54, and my wife's Aunt Harriet, who's 91 now, was also at Studio 54. She was 47 years old at the time.
Young.
Yeah, but you know, but when I was 21 in 19...
No, well, you didn't speak English then.
I spoke a form of English. Used to sit in the corner and all. So anyway, so there's Saturday Night Fever, starring John Travolta as Tony Manero. He's a young Italian-American man from Brooklyn who spends his weekday ends dancing and drinking at a local discotheque while dealing with social tensions and general relentlessness and the disillusion of his life. He's feeling directionless and trapped in his working-class neighborhoods, and he gets out on the weekends and dances. Saturday Night Fever was not the only big John Travolta vehicle. It was also a big vehicle for these guys who didn't have a drummer by the name of the Bee Gees, Barry Gibb, Andy Gibb, and Maurice Gibb. They were kind of down and out at the time. They hadn't had many big hits since the early part of the 1970s. And here they are. They're out there, and they write some songs and end up in this movie. The story is based on something called the Tribal Rights of the New Saturday Night. It was an article by the music critic Nick Cohn that was in the issue of New York Magazine in June of 1976. The film features music by the Bee Gees and many other prominent artists of the disco era. And there is Studio 54. There's Liza Minnelli and Bianca Jagger and Andy Warhol. If you were anybody in society in New York in the 1970s, you were at Studio 54. And I've talked to people about Studio 54, and they said, well, basically there were no rules. You had, Sather, S-A-T-Y-R, Sather them. So how does it feel to be one of the beautiful people? Studio 54 was the first non-judgment, queer-friendly, mainstream nightclub. It was a mixture of gay, straight, rich, famous, Monero, occasionally poor. It was also one of the few places that trans women were welcome. Drugs and sexual activity were common. And New York tabloids and the circulation war, the Daily News and the Post, would report on the beautiful people who were there. And those beautiful people included Halston, Andy Warhol. Now, can you explain this to me? Andy Warhol, he draws this Brillo box, right? It's worth millions of dollars, right? You go to Costco, you can see the same Brillo box and get it for nothing to put your stuff in. How did he do that? Campbell's soup can. Paint a Campbell's soup can. How did he, and why would people buy that stuff? Like I said, Brillo box. You go to Costco and get a Brillo box. Anyway, Halston, Andy Warhol, Liza Minnelli, Mick Jagger, Cher, David Geffen, Jack Nicholson, Michael Jackson. They were all there. So was my Aunt Harriet. So was Leslie Gore's mother. Pumping Iron, the movie Pumping Iron came out. And there's Arnold Schwarzenegger before he became the governor of California. Ever notice how he says California? California. Anyway, he's in this movie called Pumping Iron. Arnold Schwarzenegger and Lou Ferrigno from out here in Long Island face off in a no-holds-barred competition for the title of Mr. Olympia in this critically acclaimed film that made Schwarzenegger a household name, and Lou became the Incredible Hulk on the Bill Bixby show later on. Son of Sam. This was a problem for people who wanted to, dare I say, make out in cars. Somebody's going around killing people who are making out in cars. On July 29, 1976, David Berkowitz, known as the Son of Sam, eventually, committed the first of his murders in the outer boroughs of New York City. Over the next year, he would kill again 5 more times and injure at least 7. His attacks happened at night. Popular discos in Queens and the Bronx became ghost towns. His eventual capture was August 10, 1977, and that made headlines worldwide. He told investigators he received instructions to kill from his neighbor's dog up in Yonkers. Still, that area in Yonkers, still, it's kind of spooky going there. There was a New York City blackout. That was in July of 1977. Now, I was not living in New York City. I was living in the suburbs, so I was not impacted by the blackout. Anybody living in New York City in 1977? Nobody. So.
Wait a minute.
1970. Remember the blackout?
Oh, I remember the black.
Yeah, I
Not
remember.
the 65 one, the 77.
I
Yes.
remember.
77.
I was
The
in
New
Brooklyn.
York City blackout lasted for 25 hours. And there was all kind of looting and disorder. Just after 9:27 in the evening, the biggest generator in New York City, the 990 MW Ravenswood Generating Unit number 3 shut down, and with it, all of New York City. By 9:36 p.m., the entire Con Edison power system was shut down. By 10:26 p.m., operators started the restoration process. Power was not fully restored until late the following day. Because of the power failure, the airports, LaGuardia and Kennedy, were closed for 8 hours. Automobile tunnels closed because of lack of ventilation. 4,000 people had to be evacuated from the subway. Con Edison called the shutdown an act of God. And the mayor, Abe Beame of New York City, was mad. He charged that the utility was guilty of gross negligence. And here are the looters. Let's go, let's break into places. They have no electricity, they can't stop us. 1,616 stores were damaged in looting and rioting. A total of 1,037 fires were responded to, including 14 multiple alarm fires. It was the largest mass arrest in New York City history, 3,776 arrested. The city was eventually given $11 million by the Carter administration to pay for the damages of the blackout. The Bronx is burning, said Howard Cosell, except Howard Cosell never said it. I knew Howard, still friendly with his grandkids, Colin and Justin and Jared. He's on ABC. It's during a baseball game. I believe it was the World Series in 1977. And Cosell never said what he allegedly said when the Bronx was burning. Well, there it is, ladies and gentlemen, the Bronx is burning. Except he never said that. The quote never happened during the 1977 ABC telecast of Game 2 of the Los Angeles Dodgers, New York Yankees World Series matchup. But it was a black eye to New York City because it was reeling from the Son of Sam murders, the blackout, and because New York City was about ready to go bankrupt in 1975 and there was a lot of austerity, financial restrictions. Ed Koch would be elected the mayor of New York in 1977. By the way, do you know how tall Ed Koch was?
Who?
Ed Koch. Do you ever think of him a short guy or a tall guy?
No, it's tall, wasn't it?
Tall.
6'3".
Yeah.
Really?
6'3". First time I interviewed him, I had to look up. Cosell was also 6'3". They were both 6'3". Smallpox eradicated. On October 26th, the last natural case of smallpox discovered in Merka district, Somalia. Considered the anniversary of the eradication of smallpox. It's the most spectacular success of any vaccination. The Enterprise, not the Star Trek Enterprise, the Enterprise space shuttle is built, never goes into space. It was incapable of space flight. It was built without engines or a heat shield, but because there was a prototype, it made major contributions as a test vehicle and popularized the shuttle program. These are the rings of Uranus. We only thought that Saturn, when I was going to school, had rings. Uranus has rings. The definite discovery of the Uranian rings was made by the astronomers James L. Elliott, Edward W. Dunham, and Jessica Mink on March 10th. The rings were directly imaged when Voyager 2, the spacecraft, flew through the Uranian system in 1986. This guy changed your TV habits. Ted Turner. He was a rather busy boy in 1977. In 1976, the FCC allowed WTCG to use satellite to transmit content from 2 local cable providers around the nation. On December 17, 1976, WTCG TV Superstation began to broadcast old movies, situation comedy reruns, cartoons, and sports action to cable TV subscribers. As cable TV develops, many carried his station to their systems. This increased his viewers and advertisers. He also owned the Atlanta Braves baseball team in 1977, and he signs Andy Messersmith. And he decides the Atlanta Braves pitcher is wearing number 17. He should promote Channel 17. Major League Baseball said, in 1976, Turner bought the Atlanta Braves baseball team, the Atlanta Hawks basketball team for programming for his station. The TBS Superstation would beam Braves games into nearly every home in North America, and the Braves were a household name before the team had some success in the 1990s. At one point, he tells Andy Messersmith, I'll give you money, change your name from Messersmith to Channel to promote the TV station. Major League Baseball said no. He was also the manager of the team in 1977. He managed for 1 game on May 11th, 1977. And he said about not being able to manage, they must have put that rule in yesterday. If I'm smart enough to save $11 million to buy the team, I ought to be smart enough to manage. At this point, Ted Turner is thinking about putting together CNN. When things are going bad, there are 10,000 guys in the stands who think, if I could just take over this ball club for a while, I'll straighten them out. But the commissioner, Bowie Kuhn, said I couldn't manage again. I asked him it was okay if I went and managed in the minors for a year and really learned how to do so. He said, nope. So instead he goes out and invents CNN. Captain Outrageous. He's also in the world, in the America's Cup. He appears on the cover of Sports Illustrated, July 4th, 1977. He's chosen to lead the 1977 America's Cup Yacht Race Defense. He's the skipper of Courageous on September 18th, 1977. He successfully defends the America's Cup, defeating Australia 4-0. And he's still trying to figure out how to start CNN. He helped bring international attention to the America's Cup with his upset success as a defender in 1977. His antics during and immediately after the Cup, coupled with his obvious mastery of sailboat racing, made him both popular and controversial, and he's still trying to figure out how to do CNN. The mouth of the South. He spoke his mind, the mouth of the South. He's the only man voted Yachtsman of the Year 4 times, and probably the last skipper of who was an amateur of the America's Cup. Okay, how many of you saw Annie on Broadway? Okay, I'm going to give you the backstory of this. I'm going to make it real fast, but I'm 22 years old and I befriend the guy who wrote this, Tom Meehan, and we lost contact. And that kind of upset me because the next time I really looked up to see what Tom Meehan was doing is working with Melvin Kaminsky on The Producers on Broadway. And I said, I knew this guy. I was at his home. We were friendly. Anyway, Annie. So did you see Annie back in the day?
I must have seen it.
Okay, Annie opens on April 21st, 1977. Opening night was a triumph. Meehan told me. He wrote the book, Annie. The audience cheered, but we had to wait for reviews. Stuart Klein of WNEW, Channel 5 in New York, called it another great example of a Washington hit, but not good enough for New York. Pat Collins of Channel 2 WCBS predicted it would run forever. It received wonderful reviews, except from Stuart Klein, who was kind of a curmudgeon. Annie was totally unexpected, and there was a huge element of luck that was involved. There were numerous times when Annie was near death or put to death, but the play survived to become one of the biggest hits ever on Broadway. Annie. This is Meehan's story, what he told me. I had a friend named Martin Channon, a director and lyricist. Martin said one day or ever he found something that he could develop into a play. He wanted me to write the book. He told me he thought about a play based on Little Orphan Annie would do well. I thought it was a lousy idea, but he convinced me after about 3 hours to give it a chance. He also convinced Charles Strauss to write the score. Strauss also thought it was a lousy idea. So here you got the guy writing the music and the guy writing the book saying this is a lousy idea. Annie was finished in the summer of 1973. And we began playing it for various Broadway producers. By the end of 1974, beginning of 1975, we had seen 35 producers and had no takers. Martin, Charles, and I dissolved the partnership because we never thought Annie would see the light of day. And then there was the Goodspeed Theater up in Connecticut. And this is where you have to be, not only have to be good, but sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. The play was dead, but Meehan receives a call from Michael Price, a Connecticut producer, who put the play on at the Goodspeed Theater in Connecticut for 10 weeks in the summer of 1976. We're planning to close the show after the review following the 10-week run, even though it's getting standing ovations. One night, even though we didn't want to be there, Mike Nichols saw the show. How many of you know Mike Nichols?
Yeah.
Okay. Mike Nichols saw the show. He laughed and cried and came backstage and told us, "You're sitting on $1 million." And there is Mike
There he
Nichols.
is.
A few days later, Meehan receives a call from Nichols. The director would put up $100,000 to produce the show. And then he would raise $1 million. $200,000 of which came from the Kennedy Arts Center in Washington. The show opens in Washington after many revisions on March 1st, 1977 at the Eisenhower Center. Nichols told Meehan, "You will know what you have after tonight." 1,500 people got up after the production and cheered. But Nichols said the Washington audience is a pushover. It'd be different when we get to New York, so revisions had to be made. It was like Connecticut all over again, the Goodspeed Theater. We would rewrite the play every night, rehearse it all day. Nichols said it would be a flop in New York if it wasn't fixed up. We cut 2 songs, added another. There's Tom Meehan with his baby, Annie. On April 10th, 1977, Annie opened in New York for previews at the Alvin Theater. Nichols warned Meehan that the audience would be tough to impress. The audience stood up and cheered, but Nichols wasn't impressed, according to Meehan. It's the critics you have to impress. The rewrites worked. Annie was a huge success. Paul McCartney controlled the publishing, the music of the play. Let me just say this. I'm going to break script here for a second. I'm sitting with Meehan. And Meehan's telling, he said, we go over to Dick Rogers. I said, you mean Richard Rogers? He said, yeah, Dick Rogers. Do you know him? No, I'm 21 years old. Where would I know Richard Rogers? He said, so we're talking to blah, 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 blah. He said, and then we go see Paul McCartney. He said, you've never met Paul? I said, no, I'm 21 years old. Where would I have ever met Paul? He's a nice guy. And he's going through this, all of this as he's telling me about, well, you mean, you ought to meet Dick Rogers. He's a really good guy. Paul McCartney's a really good guy. You probably have. And I'm saying, where am I going to meet him? Where am I going to meet him? Lawyers for Sale, Salino and Barnes. On June 27th, the Supreme Court of the United States in a 5-4 decision said it's okay for lawyers to advertise their services. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. That's an Elvis impersonator. The Breakers Hotel in 2000. The only picture I have of an Elvis impersonator. Anyway, Carter would eventually get a peace deal between Israel and Egypt. The United States would not solve its energy problems. Carter could not get stagnation under control, and the forced recession would shock the economy. The Equal Rights Amendment never passed. Apple became a worldwide technological giant. Israel and Palestine still at war. New York City would recover financially. Carter's Soviet, Iran, and fiscal policies ruined his election bid. And that's me, as a college kid. That is me. Come on, I just came out of the pub.
I'm so tired. Are you?
Anyway, the legacy. Star Wars.
Insane.
The Walt Disney Company
Too
paid
much.
$4 billion for Lucasfilms in 2012 for the Star Wars movies. In 2010, Saturday Night Fever was deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant by the Library of Congress and selected for to be kept in the National Film Register. Studio 54 closed on February 4th, 1980. Arnold became governor of California in 2003. Anita Bryant ruined her career. Dade County gay rights were restored. Her granddaughter, in the last few months, Sarah Green, is gay and announced she's getting married to a woman. Thank you so much. Any questions, any comments? Please feel free.
Too fit. Too fit.